Hi, students. Welcome to video 6. It is on ecological relationships. So what you should be able to do after watching this video is to explain how the availability of resources influences species interactions and be able to identify examples of different types of symbiosis. So symbiosis, if you don't remember from biology, is when a relationship between two or more different species. It can be hurting one and not hurting the other, benefiting both of them, not affecting one but benefiting another. So we call these things a different name. So here's our chart. I would recommend making this exact chart. It kind of gives you a short and sweet, concise definition for each thing. And then you also want to have an example. So we're going to go through and we're going to list some examples of each of these different types of interactions. Okay, so neutralism is 0 and 0. That represents no effect on either one of the organisms. There are not very many examples of this in the real world because something can have an effect on something else in any kind of way. But an example of this would be in the desert. We don't think that tarantulas have any impact on a cactus. So again, that could change. We could decide and figure out that it does, but right now we are not aware of any kind of relationship that those two organisms have. So amensalism is when one is harmed, but the other is not affected at all.
Anthony Pittman, please come to the office. Anthony Pittman, please come to the office.
Sorry for the interruption. So example of this will be a tree that is growing and its shade actually makes it where another tree cannot grow. So a tree overshades an area and then other things cannot grow underneath it. So the tree itself is not affected, but the other things are negatively affected. Commensalism is when one is not affected, but the other is benefited in some way. So, for example, a bird's nest in a tree, the tree is not affected in any way, but the birds are benefited. Cattle egrets are these animals over here. They basically ride on the back of a cattle, and while the cattle walks around, it stirs up the bugs, and the birds get to eat the bugs. But the cattle is not affected by the birds. And then the remoras are kind of going around with the sharks. They're eating the leftovers, but the sharks are not really being impacted at all by those. Competition is going to be negative on both individuals. So they're either fighting for space, mates, territory, whatever it is, food. They're both being negatively impacted because they're having to use energy to compete with the other individual. So some types of competition, there are two. There's intraspecific, meaning between the same species. So two deer or two, whatever it is, interacting and competing for mates or space. If it's interspecific competition, it's between two different species. So for example, a lion and a coyote or something like that interacting, trying to get food. That would be interspecific competition. So to try to alleviate any of the impacts of competition, organisms do something called resource partitioning. So this is based on their niche, however you want to pronounce it. Basically, they have different roles, and as long as they have a different role from another organism, they don't have to actually compete for resources. So the standard example is the warbler living in a tree. Some of them live in the top, some live in the middle, some live in the bottom, and they basically are able to, not have to compete with one another because they have different areas that they are occupying. So what happens if two things don't occupy different niches? Basically, they just can't. There's no way that you can actually do that. One of them is going to die off. So that is what the competitive exclusion principle states. So two species cannot occupy the same job within the same ecosystem. So a paramecium bacteria is pretty popular, an example of showing this. So here is how one paramecium by itself does really well. The other one by itself also does really well, but then when you put the two of them together, one of them is going to basically die off and not be able to compete with the other one. So this will be the competitive exclusion principle. So going back to our chart, Mutualism is when both organisms are benefited. You probably know about the pollinator and the bees. So, bees pollinate flowers, that's mutualism. Same thing with the sea anemone and the Finding Nemo over here. Clownfish. So, the clownfish actually protects the sea anemone by driving off predators, and then the sea anemone provides the habitat for the clownfish. So, both of them benefit. And then finally, parasitism is when one benefits and the other is harmed. Common examples of this are ticks, especially for dogs, but also people. Here, tapeworm is an example of a parasite. So, this is actually a tapeworm that got inside someone's intestines and it just grows and grows. And these things can be like, hundreds of feet long inside people's bodies. Here's heartworms in dogs, also another parasite, and these are ones that get inside your body. Some ectoparasites, things like ticks, mosquitoes, leeches, bed bugs, all those kinds of things. And then plants can also be parasitized by different things. This is mistletoe. So if you love mistletoe over the holidays, it is unfortunately a parasite, and it gets into trees and it actually grows on the trees and basically lives off of the tree itself. When two things evolve and they kind of change with each other, that's called coevolution. So things can co-evolve, predators and prey. Bees actually have evolved to be able to see the different colors that flowers radiate. So the flowers were changing, and then the bees ended up changing in what they could actually see. So that's coevolution. And again, predator prey relationships can do this. Competitive species, so if one species is out competing another species can evolve to be more competitive. Mutualism, also, we talked about the bees and the pollinators. And then here's a simple predator prey graph. The thing to note here is just how cyclic it is. So these curves, they basically follow one another. If the hare population goes up, then the lynx population will go up. Then if the hare population goes back down, the lynx population will go down. So these are examples, again, of coevolution. All right, that's it. Bring your questions to class tomorrow.